All right, good afternoon. We're just going to start off with another poll because you guys are so good at it. And whilst we're doing that, thank you to Mipac for having us, to Dominic, Tracy and Sarah. I know there's a lot of effort that's gone into today, so thank you. All right. That's what we'd expect to see. Lots of good people wanting to go and do good work, but things change over time. So let's get into it. A mentor once told me that with context comes understanding. So I first want to zoom out, take a big picture look at what's happening in the industry and a bit broader as well. And then we'll dive into some of the frameworks that Duncan mentioned. For me, it all comes back to the paradox, productivity paradox in mining. And that is we're investing more time and energy and money into training and plant and fancy tech and all of these really cool things. And we're getting less for our money, for our investment, for our time. And in a lot of cases, productivity for many sites is actually declining. McKinsey has been running, has a thing called Mine Lens, where they track productivity in mining, and they account for deeper pits and deteriorating grades. And what they've found is that we're 25% worse than where we were 20 years ago in 2005. Accenture has run a study. It started in 2020. It's been running for 5 years continuously, and we've now got 5 years of data. And what they found is 61% of quarterly targets in the mining industry globally across commodities were missed. And when you add that up, it's a pretty big figure. It's about 13.4 billion annually in lost revenue from what was forecast. At the same time, we're dealing with this, and that's accelerating revolutions. The time between revolutions is shortening exponentially, and we're now in the agentic era. And a lot of people have compared it to the dot-com boom. A lot of companies had a website. We're all meant to be working from the beach by now. Netscape was the browser of choice. It was the clear winner. No longer exists. And so there's a lot of uncertainty around where this is going, and obviously that plays into what we're talking about today. Some lessons from history. We know it doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. So past winners, Blockbuster and Netflix is the often quoted example here, were the companies that were able to ride the wave of disruption at the time and not get dumped by it. So they saw the immediate benefit from the disruption from the technology, and in some cases they were able to buy competitors for cents on the dollar, and in some cases, Blockbuster, they weren't worth buying. So all of this comes into a balancing act that miners, suppliers and investors are currently facing in this industry. And we know that supply is constrained from the data we're seeing from the big consulting houses, from speaking with clients. If you've been on the internet in the last 5 minutes, anything to do with decarbonisation, the energy transition, that's all expected to boom, and demand is only going to increase. So we've got to find a balance there. There's been a lot of disruption just in the past 5 years, looking back at COVID, and more recently to the tariff wars as we move away from globalisation. And so there has to be a balance between the operational resilience in mine sites and yet able to embrace the innovation as we move through these industrial revolutions. Here are some pretty stark facts about where the industry is. These aren't mine. These come from McKinsey, from World Economic Forum and EY. And I wanted to ask you where you think the industry currently sits. Are we too far towards operational resilience, or are we balanced? Are we embracing innovation? Next slide. Yeah, and that was my gut feel too. Looking at those numbers, is we're very much in terms of maintaining the status quo and keeping operations going. That's a big challenge for implementing new technology. And so we believe there needs to be a shift from incremental thinking to transformational thinking. An example I like to use is a high performance athlete, and let's just think of an Olympian. They don't do anything in isolation. If they change their training, if they increase the volume or the duration or the load or any of those things, their diet changes, their recovery changes, they'd have to change how they sleep and how they eat. A lot of them work with mindset coaches, and so changes like that have a big flow-on effect. Everything is connected in what they do. Nothing happens in isolation. And our key message is business is the same. We tend to think functionally and vertically rather than cross-functionally and holistically. So how do we shift away from the incremental? How do we think longer term, bigger picture? And why isn't it so common already? One of the big challenges is holistic takes longer to get started, and we often want things yesterday. Things are already behind by the time we get started. But one of the benefits of taking this approach is that the outcome can be measured in orders of magnitude of benefit in difference. The cool thing is, because of the way it's implemented, it's become just the way we work around here. And so it's a very sustainable change. And that's the first question was, yeah, we're really good at it, but it drops off over time. So this is one of our core models in our consultancy, and we call it the Operational Performance Framework. There are 5 core elements that every operation, site, organisation needs to do well in order to be good operationally and to be able to embrace innovation and change. And so we've codified it with these five elements, and this is what I'm going to run through tonight, what we think good looks like for each of these elements and the biggest mistake that we come across. So it all kicks off with a compelling why. A compelling why must exist for an organisation, a team, an individual, and even a change. And if you're familiar with Simon Sinek's The Golden Circles, the why, the how, and the what, you'll understand why this has to sit at the centre of our framework. Without a compelling why, it's all change resistance and change fatigue. And so the first mistake is not having strategic alignment from top to bottom through an organisation. And JFK did this beautifully in his moonshot speech. It was clearly communicated, it wasn't optional, and everything was subordinated to this priority. Even the wording in this is clear that we choose to do this, we accept that it'll be difficult and it's going to be a challenge. And there's the famous incident, the famous story that JFK is walking through NASA after giving this speech, and he comes across a janitor. He says, "What do you do here? What's your role?" And the janitor says, "I'm working to put man on the moon." And so that's about that bigger why. It wasn't there just to empty bins. So the moonshot leads me to my next point, and that's around strategic ambition and capability. The two are intertwined, and we place a lot of emphasis on strategy, and we think about leadership offsites and where we're going in the next year, 3, 5 years, but we tend to forget about the capability aspect. Both are required because strategic ambition leads capability. Capability is required to achieve or execute on that ambition. You can't have one without the other. In the NASA example, I'm going to keep using this example, they had to raise their capability. They had to invent the maths and the materials in order to get to the moon. When JFK gave his speech in 1962, they'd just put Glenn Powell into orbit, and they had to cut that short because it didn't go to plan. So in terms of strategic ambition, over here you have low, and up here you have high. They're out here somewhere. They had very low capability, and they're way off in terms of what they wanted to achieve. They had 8 years, but they had a remit from the public. The US public would not concede the space race to the USSR. So they had 8 years for NASA to fail and blow up as many rockets as they wanted, effectively. And every time they did, they learned something, and their capability went up. And that made it a little bit more realistic. And as they kept coming up, they ended up in this quadrant as they increased their capability. And so if you think about it, from World War II rockets, which is where they started, and going, we're going to land on the moon, strategically, right, way out here, more ambitious. If you go to Apollo 10, they're orbiting the moon now. To go from orbiting to landing is far less ambitious. And so that's how they went up and landed in there. And what we find is a lot of mining companies, everyone sets their own strategy. 61% of quarterly targets are missed. Everyone sets their own. And so what we're finding is that a lot of companies tend to sit down in here. That's the Essentia data. The underperformance, so low strategic ambition, low capability, that's sites that you'd expect to be going care and maintenance, or they can no longer play the game. And so they're the victim of a hostile takeover. I can't think of a single case where anyone has high capability but just isn't being ambitious. I don't know if anyone else has an example. So that's effectively the quadrants, and it helps us to visualize where organizations sit. Is their expectation realistic? There's a question coming up, not here. So if we dive into capability, the vertical axis, we've come up with the capability curve to help define this, because it's quite intangible for a lot of people. And so this is a way that we can objectively measure sites, teams, organizations. And we measure on a scale of innocence to excellence. And what we find is that the majority of sites sit in turbulence. It's chaotic, it's unpredictable. We generally rely on key people to get things done. If they're not there, things don't happen. That often comes back to approvals as well. Productivity is low, and the big reason for this is your operational friction is really high. There are systems and processes and things like that in place, but they're not effective and they're not efficient, and so nobody's really sure how things are done, or it's ignored and people just do it their own way in order to get it done. And that means that your operational performance is quite low. And that's the never enough time to do it right, but there's always enough time to do it twice, is what we hear from people in this turbulent state. And our job as consultants is to help people get through this bottleneck and reach the competence level. And we call this autopilot, because things just get easier. Your friction and your performance have inverted. And so your system's now working for you, and that's the idea of leverage, and performance just goes up dramatically. Operational excellence is a great thing to aim for, and I'll let Dom talk about that more because I know it's a passion of his. Great to aim for. We say just try and hit competence for now. And so this inflection point is effectively the horizontal. So very few sites sit above the horizon. Which leads me to my next question. Which quadrant do you guys think your site, or a client site that you're most closely associated with, sits in? This is anonymous. More answers? Interesting. I would have thought more in missed guidance, but yeah, our expectation was it was below the horizon point. That's typically what we see as well. And so all of this is a challenge, right? Sites don't have the capability, they're struggling as it is. and now you're adding extra work on top in terms of adopting a new technology. And to really stress this point and drive it home, because you'll be sick of it soon, I want to point out, capability is the predictive indicator of success. And I recently saw this image on a LinkedIn post a few weeks ago. It wasn't related to mining, but effectively it points out that in 1975, 17% of value in the S&P came from intangible assets. Brand, culture, processes, data, relationships, things like that, IP. By 2020, so in the space of 25 years, we're at 90% of the value. So if you think about a mine site, everyone has something in the ground. Most have some big yellow toys driving around, process plant. What's the difference? Like, these are just table stakes in mining, so what's the difference between a good and a great site? What's the difference? The first poll, a lot of people had good with technology adoption, but not everyone. What's the difference there? And our view of the world is it comes back to capability. Investors, executives will pay a management premium for the right leaders and the right leadership. They're not bringing a tool belt to site. They're not bringing big yellow toys with them. But yet it's expected that the intangible that they bring has an outside reward to the operation, to the business. That was the first point. So empowering leadership is the second fundamental in our framework. Without leadership, nothing meaningful can happen. Again, I'm pointing to the JFK example. It sits at the bottom because it is foundational. The compelling why is the structure. This is the foundation. Decades of research has shown that leadership is not innate. We need to teach it. And typically when we think of training, we think of the end user. Who's going to be using this software? What we tend not to take into account are the champions, the sponsors, and all of the other support functions. Again, we tend to think vertically, functionally, rather than across the organization. Just a heuristic, an easy way to think about this is RACI. Who's responsible? The user. We train them pretty well. Who's accountable? The sponsor. Have we trained them how to sponsor projects? Who needs to be consulted and who needs to be informed? Generally, these people are left off until quite late, and we need to engage all of them. Might be safety, L&D, HR, corporate leadership, the list goes on. But one of the big things here is the bigger the change delta, that all depends on how high up you go in terms of your sponsor. Transformational change only comes from the top. So mistake number 2 is about this lack of comprehensive training across, and comprehensive not in training the user, but everyone else in the organisation. And I want to introduce ProSci's ADCAR model here. This is a model for individual change, and it's based on the belief that when you change the individual, you change the organisation. We've covered awareness in the compelling why, desire I'll get to in a minute. But the knowledge, the ability, and the reinforcement, it all comes back to leadership. It's all about motivating, directing, so that people can direct their duty. And so this is one of the big mistakes that we see. Commitment culture. If leadership is one side of the coin, culture is the other. And what do I mean by commitment culture? It is a team that has high discretionary effort. People are motivated intrinsically. They have a compelling why beyond just the financial, and they're more motivated, more accountable. They're willing to go the extra mile. And the contrast to this is a compliance culture, and it is extrinsically motivated. It's administratively costly, because one of the easiest ways to explain this is these are places where you have to track people's hours worked. It all has to be logged and tracked, and so it is very hard, very heavy, very costly, very hard to sustain. So how do you affect culture? Who you hire, fire, and everything in between. I think of the highly visible, high impact people you see on sites. I call them hammers, because to them everything is a nail, and that's how they go around. they tend to get promoted because they are highly effective and highly visible, to the detriment of everything else happening on site. It affects the culture, the median, and the long-term results. They effectively poison the well. And if you've heard the saying that people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad bosses, that's who they're talking about generally. Has anyone left a bad boss? The front row is very nervous. It looks like just you, Duncan, I'm sorry. Or is that Eddie? Yeah, so I picked on a very specific sort of group or personality in not just mining, but engineering, construction, that kind of industry. They're prolific, but it's not just them. And so what's the big mistake? Well, it's disobeying the diffusion of innovation curve. This has been around since 1962. It stood the test of time. And what most people do is they try and pitch, they need the majority, the 68% in the middle, they go straight to them. And they're the wrong people to go to. What you need to do is you need to create FOMO. And that starts over here on the left. And you need to, instead of pushing change through the organisation, you need to create that desire, the second part of the ADCAR model, and pull it through an organisation. And so, very quickly taking you through this, innovators, they make up the smallest portion. Steve Jobs was the popular example. Lots of people like to throw Elon Musk into there. It's political, so leave that up to you. Early adopters, they are people that will sacrifice time, energy, or money for something they're passionate about or they believe in. These are the people that line up all night to buy movie tickets when if you wait 24 hours, you can just walk straight in. These are the people that bought mobile phones when they were the size of a briefcase, talking about the previous revolution. The opposite of these people are the laggards. And these are the people that would still be trying to buy rotary phones if they could. Compromising with the laggards is very costly, so do it at your own peril. The majority is where change happens and where sustainable change happens. So think of that first question. Good change dies off. That's because you didn't get the majority involved that would buy in. And to do that, you need to cross the chasm. This happens at 15 to 17% of the population. It may sound big, but 10% of people just get it. 10% of the room will just get certain things. Capability is important, for example. And so, yeah, the middle majority, they're cynical. They're all about what's in it for me. And they don't want to spend any of their time, energy, or money, but they're willing to buy something once it's been proven, and that's what we need to do. And so Simon Sinek gave this really good example. He got called up by a 200,000 person organisation in the States, and the executive said, "We've got a big millennial population in our company, we have a problem. We want you to come in and design this training, we want you to film all the videos, and we're going to push it through the organisation." And Sinek turned around and said, "No, thank you. What I will do is one workshop for a few of your offices for about 100 people." And what he did was he got these people, millennials, to write an essay, and this was before ChatGPT. And so they actually had to sit there and type it out, and they could tell who was phoning it in or who really wanted to be there. They were spending their own time, there was no money, but their own energy. And so they ran this workshop, they got about 100 people, and at the end they said, "We're creating this millennial training program. Who wants to help? Before you put your hand up, you'll get no personal benefit, there'll be no recognition, you'll have to work a bit more and you won't be paid for it." And they got 50 people, so about 50% of the room. And so they went off and they started building this program. A few weeks go by, and Cynic gets this angry call from the first executive that reached him. And they said, "You won't believe how many calls and emails and everything else I've had from all over the company demanding, why don't we have a millennial training program in our team, in our office, in our location?" And Cynic said, "Congratulations, you've now got demand. We've built the program, we've tested it with a small group of people, and now the organisation is pulling it through. And we've all sat through training, through death by PowerPoint and all of those things, and that is information, that is change that's forced upon you. But when you have a desire to learn it, because these people got FOMO, that pulls through the organisation, and that's one way to really overcome that challenge." And so the question is, in your teams, in your businesses, in your organisations, how can you identify and engage the early adopters? Almost there. Enabling tech, the fourth of five. We often refer to this as fit-for-purpose technology. And the idea is the tools don't make the tradesperson. Your success does not come solely from technology. Let me finish, Mipac. It's that the tools create the competitive advantage, but they aren't the competitive advantage. And what that means is you need all of these elements to be successful. And that's in getting the technology adopted. So all of these elements just to get the adaptation. At the other end of fit-for-purpose technology is legacy technology, and that is the unwillingness to embrace innovation. And we see this a lot particularly in M&As, where technology is not consistent across companies, and you often lose the visibility and the governance. And there was a big problem a decade ago when I was in the UK. A lot of big engineering companies had bought up all the smaller boutiques. They had no visibility. And so when these companies, which were sold on winning contracts, didn't eventuate, it took them down like a house of cards, and I think 3 or 4 of them failed within about 6 months. So the big mistake with this is silver bullet thinking, and that is looking for the one thing that can be plugged in, switched on, minimal effort, to solve all of the problems. And the topical example is AI. And AI is a great tool. We're implementing it in our business, and Duncan was talking about the mining value index that we're bringing to market, and it will be an AI-enabled tool, but it can be because it sits on top of our knowledge bases and our databases, and we've been very deliberate in creating the quality and the high capability that it sits on top of and enables. There's a lot of FOMO around AI, because it's taking off in non-critical, non-safety critical sectors. And the big one that I've seen is marketing automation. You can have an unsupervised AI agent just off doing its own things. It's spending money on LinkedIn ads, it's sending connection requests, it's optimizing landing pages. And so it's creating a lot of FOMO in that. But these are very specialized niches with very mature data knowledge bases. They're quite narrow vertically. And so mining is a different beast. There's a time and a place for AI, but particularly in transition periods like the one we're in, we do urge caution and be aware of FOMO. If leadership and culture are the same, two sides of the same coin, then so is technology and processes. And processes need to be lean, they need to be owned, effective and efficient. I recently heard it described as an egg and spoon race. And if you get to the finish line first and your egg is back there on the ground, you haven't won because you haven't met the objective. And so effectiveness is about meeting the objective, and efficiency is about doing it in the most economical way. And that's generally where technology comes in. The focus always needs to be on effective first. Efficiency will come. If not, that's where we hear a lot of the times, never enough time to do it right, always enough time to do it twice. And so the big mistake here is half-completed projects. They're not closed, so nobody owns the technology, the change, the software. And we saw this, the classic example in offices was photocopiers and coffee machines. Nobody was responsible for maintaining them, buying more ink, buying more coffee. And maybe somebody took up that mantle. These machines always tended to die, common office equipment, when you need them most and when that person's not in the office. And so because it's not owned by anyone, no one knows what to do, what's the approval process, how do we get this paid for? And so a lot of projects that we see going forwards risk becoming the new photocopiers and coffee machines. And that's the framework. I want to give you a bonus mistake, and that is the too little too late. And the idea, this is the iceberg of ignorance, and the idea is a lot is known to the front line and very little is known the further away you get from it. And the engineering cost curves, looking at who's in the room, a lot of you should be familiar with this. You have concept over here and you have commissioning on the right-hand side. And as you move through the curve, your influence goes down and your cost to change things goes up. And unfortunately, the front line, these people aren't great at getting their message across a lot of the times early enough. And what this means is consultants are generally brought in here. And so you probably notice some similarities between the two curves. It's not a coincidence. And the whole point here is that without the right capability across these 5 performance elements, it's going to take longer, it's going to cost more. A quick example is we were contacted last year by a gold mine and they wanted urgent help. They told us that they were in this zone right here, but they're also building a new processing plant as well. And so the question is, without a concerted effort, without an intervention, what do you think this new processing plant, what do you think will happen to the new processing plant when it comes online? They commission it, it starts up. The operators will walk out of the old plant and into the new. Will they magically get new habits, or will they take old habits with them? It's a bigger plant, they have to hire more people. How will that affect the culture and the operations? How will the plant ramp up? How will it run? And so are they perpetuating this productivity paradox, or are they breaking the cycle? And so something to think about is, how would you approach this situation? So, home stretch, 3 frameworks. Performance quadrants measures skill versus will. Are your expectations realistic? Capability curve measures skill. And the operational performance framework is a holistic view that helps us move away from incremental and towards transformational. And so if there's one thing you take away from this, I hope that it's you're fully aware of the operational capability at your site before engaging in a software or technology adoption, so that there's no unwelcome and costly surprises. And when facing complex decisions, we believe in always going back to first principles thinking. Thank you. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Yeah? Does anyone have any questions? Up the back. My perception is that mining is more siloed, and what we tend to see is a department gets a pineapple or a grenade and they throw it over the wall to the next department, and it's someone else's problem, and it's just all of that flowing over. In other industries, I think you have a lot more deliberate cross-pollination. I spent a lot of time in rail, and so there were very deliberate cross-functional workshops that were built into the process, and that's both in Australia and the UK when I was there. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Yes. It's not something that we talk about explicitly, but it's linked to this to the friction and performance. And so what we find is when you're at the right-hand side of this, your ability to respond goes up, and that comes back through the leadership, that comes back through the culture. The tech is open to it as well. So yeah, agility tends to follow the performance curve with this model. Yeah. Yeah, so we use this model as the yardstick, what we measure against. We measure all of those 5 elements. So we look at the why, we look at leadership and team dynamics, individual and team dynamics. We look at the culture, the tech, and so we've got metrics that sit behind this model that we look at. We have a model called the strategy to bank, and it's the seven steps in a value chain. So strategy, values, behaviours, actions, outputs, outcomes and impacts that we can also assess. But it all comes back to how mature is an organisation, and so there's metrics that sit behind it. Anyone else? No? All right, well thank you very much.